So we have 6 games on tonight, Monday, and there are some playoff ramifications of sorts as teams start settling themselves out as to who does or doesn't make the playoffs. And of course, seeding is becoming kind of set for some of these teams, and we'll get to that. First up, the Buffalo Sabres, who are 25, 41, and 12. 62 points for those keeping track at home, and with the inside track on finishing last overall and getting the best shot at winning the draft lottery. They're in against Toronto, who are 47, 25, and 7. They're now third. So the Leafs are guaranteed to be third in the division. In the playoffs, yes, but guaranteed to start on the road, which might be a benefit for this team. Antspin's out with a concussion symptoms. There's no word on whether or not he's going to be back for this game. Dermott's out for Toronto. McElhinney's starting for Toronto. And no word yet on what's going to happen with Buffalo, whether or not Leonard's healthy and can go tonight, or if he doesn't, they could go with Johnson, they could go with Holmark. Buffalo's 3-6-1 in their last 10, and Toronto's 7-3 in their last 10. Really, this is one of those games that if Toronto loses it doesn't really make a difference to the standings. And I don't expect them to necessarily play their A lineup from here going forward. They're going to be resting some guys. That's going to happen. And it may not necessarily just be healthy scratches. It may be third period, a guy, maybe Matthews sits. Maybe Babcock's like, all right, well, we're going to give Matthews the third off. This kind of thing is going to happen for the last few games because Toronto can't move up or move down. And the only thing that they have left to worry about is injury. And as a Boston fan, I can tell you, injury's real, and you got to be very concerned about playing your key guys in games that don't really make a big difference. I understand Boston's going for first place, so I don't expect them to let up. But I do expect that with Toronto somewhat tonight. And for Buffalo, all they have left really is the fact that they could be number one at the draft lottery. They don't really have a whole lot left. And I mean management. The players on the ice could care less about finishing last overall and getting the draft lottery. If anything, they should be playing harder. They should be doing their best to win this game tonight. That doesn't mean much for Toronto, but psychologically, I think finishing outside of last place overall, I don't know. I think you don't mention the number 29 team out of 30, the number 30 team out of 31 quite as much. It's a stretch, I know, but it's all they got left. Speaking of all they got left, Carolina 35, 33, and 11, 5-5 in their last 10. They're not making the playoffs. They're in against Florida, who are 39, 30, and 8. Florida's 7 points back of a wild card spot, and really that illustrates just how quickly things have changed. It wasn't that long ago they were 1 point back with a couple games in hand, and now, nope, they're 7 points back. They've still got a game in hand, but it's done for them. Luongo's starting for them tonight. They're 5-4-1. I guess if you're Florida, you don't give up till you're mathematically eliminated. If Carolina wins this tonight, they are mathematically eliminated. So let's see if the Hurricanes can do what they aren't going to do in a week or two, and that is eliminate somebody from the playoffs. It's been a long, disappointing season for the Carolina Hurricanes, and this is a downer of an ending for Florida as well. And again, the trick with this is it's easy to say, okay, well, they can carry it on into next year, but there are plenty of teams that have had good runs in the last half of a year and not carried on into this year. And Carolina themselves are a good example of that. Carolina had a fantastic run at the end of last year. It looked like they were going to be great, and I'm like, yep, they're going to make the playoffs. So because Carolina failed to carry that over, I am far less likely to be predicting a huge rise for Florida next year in the standings, which is too bad for Florida, I guess. And we'll get to that in July/August when I do my season previews. But yeah, Florida has had a really solid second half. It's been a bit of a downer the last 10 games, but it's really hard to play at that level every single night. The pressure that players feel, it's sort of like I've been talking about goalies being exhausted, and people are like, well, why are goalies getting exhausted? Because they're on the ice for 60 minutes of a game, or 65 if it's overtime, and you know, more than that if they're playing in a shootout. It's the mental game. They get mentally worn down, and physically you're exhausted. And having a day off when you're going through that one day doesn't necessarily mean that you're better. You're going to get aches and pains as a goaltender. It's totally different. Player's tired, he can go to a coach and say, geez, coach, I'm feeling kind of out of it. Coach can be like, well, all right, we'll cut your ice time back a bit next game. No big deal. Goaltender, coach is like, well, you're the best guy, though. Sorry, I understand you're tired, but you're playing. That's why Luongo would be in net tonight. Luongo, though, is a guy who never asks for a night off. When he was in Vancouver, you had to basically tell him, you're not playing tonight, because he refused to sit out, wanted to be a part of everything, and I'm sure it's the case as well in Florida. And I feel bad for the guy because he is very competitive, and once again, he's missing the postseason. So, all right, moving on. Winnipeg, 48, 20, and 10 overall. That's 106 points, boys and girls. They are 7 points back in Nashville with 4 games remaining. So here we're in a similar situation to Florida's. If Winnipeg loses tonight in Ottawa, Winnipeg won't be able to finish first, but really they're not going to finish first anyways. They need Nashville to lose every game from here on going forward, and make sure that at least 2 of them are in regulation. Winnipeg 7-2 in their last 10. They are entrenched in second. Minnesota can't catch them. They can't catch Nashville if they lose this one or Nashville wins their next one. So there's not a whole lot on the line for Winnipeg tonight as they go into Ottawa. Ottawa's 27, 40, and 11. They're 3-7 in their last 10. Craig Anderson's confirmed as a starter for Ottawa. Anderson's an interesting one for me because I'm wondering how much time he has left. And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have when a player's probably done or nearly done. And Anderson, to me, I don't know. He'll come back next year. But is that as the backup? Do they bring someone else in to start? Is Ottawa going to start to go in another direction? Anderson's been a great team guy, of course. What he went through last season with his wife and all of the inspirational storylines that went along with that, which is why I haven't talked about the Masterton Trophy, because Brian Boyle's winning it. I can't understand how anybody wouldn't win it other than Brian Boyle, but I digress. Ottawa's got a lot of decisions to make in the offseason. This game tonight is just another test of character for this team, and seeing what their young kids are going to be able to do from here going forward. And we're going to have a referendum in the offseason on the whole Duchesne trade. I know Dorian's staying, but how is the rest of this going to shake out? What is the direction of this team? Where are they going to go? And then, of course, if they finish, say Buffalo wins and Ottawa loses, that only puts Ottawa 1 point clear of Buffalo. What if they get that number 1 draft pick? How does that change the picture going forward? So there's a lot of unanswered questions with Ottawa. The only one left for Winnipeg is, who are they playing in the first round? That first round opponent might be Minnesota. Edmonton's 34, 39, and 6. They're 4-4-2 in their last 10. Last I saw, they were 18 points out of the playoffs. I think that's 20 now. 19. They're 19 points out of the playoffs now. They're playing in Minnesota. Minnesota's 43, 25, and 10 overall. They're 4-3-3 in their last 10. They're third. They're 3 points ahead of Colorado, 4 points ahead of St. Louis. Dubnyk starting, and of course Suter's out with a broken fibula. So if you're a Minnesota fan, you're upset about that. He's at least out the rest of the regular season, and he's probably out for at least the first round of the playoffs. I would think season, but they haven't confirmed that it's for the entire season on the sites I've been using. And it's frustrating. I will say this, though. For Minnesota fans who are thinking, well, that's it, our season's over, it doesn't matter. I've watched Boston without McAvoy, Chara, and now without Carlo, sometimes without Krug. As long as Minnesota's depth is good, then I don't think there's any reason to abandon ship right now and say, all right, well, just miss, no problem, just forget about it. There seems to be enough heart and drive in Minnesota to make this work. Remember, they had a lot of injuries early in the season, and they're still in a playoff spot. During that period of time where they had all of those injuries and everything was mounting, they still had a half-decent record. The way that I look at it with the playoffs is this. The playoffs seem to be very, very challenging unless you look at it this way. You have to win 4 out of 7. You can lose 3 out of 7. You have to win 4. That's as simple as you can make it. all they need is Dubnyk to steal, say, 2. So let's say it's Minnesota and Winnipeg. If Dubnyk can steal 2, if they can steal 1 out of the first 2 against Winnipeg, and put some doubt in the minds of the Jets, then the Minnesota Wild can win a round. And the longer they go in the playoffs, the better chance they have for getting Suter back. Sure, it's not likely anytime soon, but you know what? I've seen stranger storylines take place in the playoffs, so I don't think that it's all for naught yet. And for Edmonton, guys are playing for jobs next year, so I would look for them to be very competitive tonight. Probably a little bit fighty, probably a few fights in that game. Next up, Washington. 47, 25, and 7. They're first in their division. That's locked in now. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They will play the number 1 wild card. The number 2 wild card will have to play either Tampa or Boston. The Capitals are in against St. Louis, who are 43, 29, and 6. Of course, they're 1 point back of the number 2 wild card spot with 1 game in hand, and they're 7-2-1 in their last 10. Games in hand are tricky. You have to win them. And the Capitals, even though they've clinched a playoff spot, even though they've clinched first in their division, even though they can't move up, I get the feeling that the Capitals are going to come in against St. Louis tonight and play a pretty solid game. I'd be surprised if it wasn't Holtby, though. I would think Holtby and Hutton, and we'll see how that works out scoring-wise. It could end up being kind of a high-scoring game if those are the 2 goalies that they go with. But Washington doesn't want to get complacent going into the playoffs. They want to prove themselves again. And as a guy who's kind of out there, I revealed my 30 favorite teams, and Washington's in there. And I'm trying really hard to believe on some level that they can do something. But again, it's their history. And for St. Louis, part of St. Louis's history is very similar in that no, St. Louis has never won a championship. They've had some very good teams that have somehow fallen short in the playoffs. And I'm not talking about recent. I'm talking about back when they had Al McInnes on that blue line. I'm talking about when they had a fantastic team that finished first overall and it just didn't work. That's the team I'm talking about. I'm talking about when they had Cujo, and Cujo was fantastic in the playoffs, and yet somehow it still didn't work. So there's 2 teams here that might have the most desperate fan bases for playoff success. St. Louis has to win that game. It could be, this is another one that could get kind of chippy. And the question that I would have for the Capitals is this. You've clinched first. Ovechkin's going for the Rocket Richard Trophy, and he has an outside shot at 50 goals. Do you play him a ton and try to get him those 50 goals, or do you rest him because you don't want to see him get hurt and you want to make sure he's fresh for the playoffs? That's a key question that Barry Trotz would have to answer. And finally, last but not least, the thing de resistance. The Colorado Avalanche and the LA Kings will be fighting it out in a battle of the wild cards. So because Colorado loses to Anaheim last night in a battle of the wild cards, Anaheim jumps to 3rd place in the Pacific, meaning LA is now the wild card. So is Battle of the Wild Cards again. I think it's brilliant by Colorado. It's a great way to sell tickets for LA, like they sold tickets for Anaheim last night. Colorado's 42, 28, and 9 overall. They're number 2 wild card spot. They're 5-4-1 in their last 10. LA's 43, 28, and 8. They're the number 1 wild card. They're 1 behind Anaheim. They are 1 above Colorado, which means they are 2 above St. Louis. LA is not out of danger. It is quite possible Colorado and St. Louis steal those 2 playoff spots and LA falls out. Which would kind of, to some people, it would prove the theory that the Pacific Division is a lot weaker than the Central, because then you have 5 Central Division and 3 Pacific Division teams. I don't really buy it. There are some really weak teams in the Pacific, yes, but I don't think that necessarily means the teams from the Pacific that make the playoffs are weak. So for LA... Okay, I got interrupted. My work's trying to call me in today. So I work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Anyways, and they wanted to call me in for Friday, too. People wonder why I'm... Alright. Anyways, so Colorado comes in with a fan base that's probably not very happy about the loss against Anaheim. Understandable. LA's got a fan base that may be a little bit nervous because suddenly they're only 2 points clear of missing the playoffs. Understandable. What does that equal? This is game of the night candidate right here. I really am anxious to watch this game. I work at 7:45 tomorrow morning, so fun. That being said, I'll stay up. I'll watch this. I'll do the review video at the end of tonight. And today is kind of an exciting day because we're going to go and see Vancouver, the Vancouver Giants, in Game 6 against Victoria. If Vancouver wins, they move on to round 2. If they lose, it goes to Game 7. We're not going to Victoria for Game 7. But this to me is going to be the game of the night. I would expect Bernier. I can't see them putting in Hammond. Now, they could. They absolutely could, and Hammond played well in his first game, and they could. Obviously, Varlamov is out. But I would be surprised if Bernier doesn't play tonight. And even as I say it, I think, well, wait, no, because while Bernier didn't cost them the game, they wore down late in the game. Maybe they put in Hammond instead. LA, I can't see it not being Quick because the playoffs are on the line. And Jonathan Quick, when it's an important game, is usually a key guy. I would personally think LA wins this game, but I've learned this season not to underestimate Colorado when they've got Nathan MacKinnon in the lineup. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and welcome to the channel. Either way, thank you guys very much for watching. You guys being out there makes it worth being in here, and I'll talk to you again soon.